Parshas Chaya is really divided into two halves. The first half deals with Avram's arranging for the purchase of the Maras Machpelah, to be the burial place for Sarah, ultimately for himself and subsequent generations. Yitzchak and Rivka are buried there, Yaakov and Leah are buried there. So this is the family plot. The second half of the parsha is the shlichus, the mission of the servant of Avram to find a wife for Yitzchak. So the first half of the parsha deals with the purchase of a grave. The second half deals with wedding. So in theory, that would be the raw material for a joke. But there really is a very deep connection to the two halves of the parsha. It's very interesting that the Mishnah says in Maseches Kedushin that one of the three ways in which a marriage is contracted is with kesef. If the groom gives the bride something of monetary value, kesef, so that affects marriage. And that's the way we do it. That's why we give a ring. There's no halacha per se that it has to be a ring. That's a Jewish custom. The main thing is that the groom gives the bride something of value. That's called kesef. So where do we know that from? Where do we know that that's a method of affecting a marriage? So the Gemara learns this from a Gzeira Shava. Gzeira Shava is a method of biblical interpretation. We find the same word in two places. So we draw an analogy. So it says in the case of marriage, ki yikach ish isha, if a man should take a wife, and it says by the purchase of the Maras Machpelah, Avram said, Nasati kesef asad, I've given the money for the field, kach mimeni, take the money. So in both places we have the Hebrew word for taking. So the Gemara says, kicha mistayafren. We draw an analogy from the purchase of the Maras Machpelah to contracting a marriage. Just like the purchase of the Maras Machpelah was done for kesef, for something of monetary value, so Kedushin is contracted by giving something of monetary value. Now the fact that this halacha is derived from the purchase of the burial place seems that there is a very deep connection between contracting a marriage and purchasing a burial plot. And the fact that these two ideas are juxtaposed in the parsha is further confirmation of that. Like, what really is the connection? Now, the Gemara Brachas says a very interesting thing. The Gemara Brachas says that there once was a wedding, and Rav Hamnuna was asked to sing at the wedding. Lishwi Ladmar, sing something appropriate for the wedding. So he sang a song that began with the words, Vailon de Misnan, woe unto us, we're going to die. Woe unto us, we're going to die. That was the song he sang at the wedding. It hardly seems appropriate. The Mefarshim tell us that Rav Hamnuna was able to see through the festivities and understand exactly what's going on. There's the idea of marriage being the first step in the process of having children and bringing a new generation into the world really is our attempt to overcome the limitation of death. Because we all realize we're not going to be here forever. And we're going to pass the baton, so to speak, on to a new generation. And that's really the idea that underlies every wedding. Because every wedding is the celebration of the parents working towards guaranteeing their eternity. And it's very, very interesting. I'll share you something personal, which I said shortly after my own daughter's wedding, that everyone says that it's such a special moment when you walk your daughter, you walk your child to the chuppah. And that's true. It's a great thrill to walk your child to the wedding canopy. But there's another moment at the wedding which I think is even more poignant, which is after the ceremony is over and the chassan and the kala, the bride and the groom, walk on, and they're escorted by singing and dancing, and who remains behind under the chuppah? Their parents. And to me, that was also a very meaningful moment, because that's exactly what it is. The idea is that our children are going to go on and survive us, and we're going to be left behind. And that's inevitable. That's the way of the world. And yet we feel we have so much to do, and so much to achieve, and so much we want to accomplish in life. But we understand that there's a limit. We only are given a finite number of years, and it's going to be our children who are going to carry on. And when they get married, and again, they embark on the path which will ultimately lead to their having children, so that in a sense guarantees our nitzchias, it guarantees our eternity. And that's what Rav Hamnuna understood at the wedding. He understood that really every wedding, every marriage is really an attempt to overcome that limiting factor of death. So when he was asked to sing, that's what he sang. Ba'alam demisnu, oh, tell us we're going to die. And that's a reality that we have to face up to at every wedding. So, you go to a wedding and there's singing and there's dancing and there's good food and everyone's having a little good time and you see your relatives, but really there's something very, very serious and very, very, very deep which is occurring. We are conquering death. We are transcending the limitations of death. And through the marriage of our children and, again, the fostering of a new generation. Now, it's not just that there is something of our genes which is perpetuated. Now that itself is meaningful. But it's also there's something of our values which are perpetuated. As we raise children and we hope for grandchildren, because we hope not just that our biological endowment will be preserved, we hope that something that we've stood for, something that we've taught, something that we valued will be preserved. And that really is the significance of the Maras Machpelah, of the burial site. Now, the burial site is a shrine to the past generations. It's a place we go to venerate the memories, the legacy that was left behind by the Avos and the Imos, the patriarchs and the matriarchs. And I think that's really what Avram had in mind. Because it wasn't then simply to find a place to dispose of the body. That isn't the issue at all. My assumption is that Eretz Yisrael was not densely populated at the time, and he could have found a abandoned site. It was just a question of disposing of a body. The point was, he wanted what the Torah calls nachuzas kever. He wanted a possession for the purpose of burial. He wanted a cemetery. He wanted really a shrine to the memories of the founders of the nation. Abraham, of course, understood that he wasn't just an individual. He was the founder of a nation. God had told him such. And he knew that his children and grandchildren would also serve as founders of the nation. Therefore, it was important that there be a veneration, if you will, of their burial place, a place that later generations would come to pray and to contemplate what was lost with their passing. So therefore, the two halves of the parsha really dovetail. We're talking about Avraham Avinu arranging for the eternity of Klal Yisrael. So in the second half of the parsha, he arranges for the biological eternity of Klal Yisrael, finding a wife for Yitzchak, who will perpetuate the line. But before that, and perhaps equally important, he's arranging for the perpetuation of values. And that's the idea of the Maras Machpelah. This is the idea of the place of the Avos and the Imos finding their eternal rest, but the place that we venerate and return to as a shrine to their memories and their values. That really is the idea of the parsha. This is really a parsha where Avram functions not as a tzaddik in his own right, but he functions as an Av, as a patriarch, as a founder of the nation, who is charged with the mission of perpetuating the values of the nation. Question?
Yeah, at the end of the Chumash, we're told that we have no idea where Moshe Rabbeinu is buried. And some say that it's a fear of veneration, of inappropriate veneration of the Avodah Zarah. Here, there seems to be no concern about veneration of a person.
See, the question is really this. The question is there a risk of the person being worshipped as a deity?
Yeah.
That was something unique to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, after all, had went up to heaven. He had communed with Malachim. According to the Rambam, he became a Malach himself. In other words, the radiance of his face really was symbolic of the fact that he had remained angelic in nature. So there was a unique issue that if his burial place would be known, not only would he be honored, but he'd be worshipped. And that was something that had to be avoided.
This is not a problem.
But in the case of the others, apparently they felt it wasn't a problem, and therefore they felt that there was no need to conceal their burial place. Yes?
Going back to the purchase of a burial plot, I know a lot of Jewish people, when they're members of synagogue and they pay the building fund, and that's kind of buying a burial plot. But is that halacha? Is that to purchase this before you pass on, or could the family buy it at the time when someone passes on? Is there a halacha in that, or are we following Avram Avinu's?
It's not a halakhic obligation, but what I do think is this. There is a. Give you an example. There's a great question as to where a person should want to be buried. It's become very popular to be buried in Israel.
Right.
And we derive this from the fact that a little bit later in the Chumash, Yaakov Avinu made the request to be transported to Eretz Yisrael. So from this we derive that there's a benefit of burial in Eretz Yisrael. It's an atonement or whatever. So many great people and some not so great people made arrangements for their ultimate burial in Eretz Yisrael. There's a counter argument which goes this way, that if a person lived in Canada or the United States, by having his body transported to Israel, he creates the likelihood that his children will not frequent the grave. They won't come often. And therefore some say that better to opt for local burial, and this way your children will be able to come to the gravesite. Now the question is, why is that important? And I think that really is something that we learn from our parsha. In other words, Avraham Avinu wanted that his grave should be a place for pilgrimage. People should come to it. This is a way of perpetuating the values. Of course, we remember our parents, but when we go to their grave, this is an opportunity to really reflect on what we learned from them, what they taught us, their inspiration, etc. And that's something very powerful, very, very important. It really is the perpetuation, the completion of your own mission in life. And therefore, I think it's a very strong counter-argument. Yeah, there are great benefits to burial in Eretz Yisrael, and we all hope to be there someday. But in the meantime, the argument could go that being close means that you'll be able to impact your family, your children, even after 120 years. And that's something worth considering. I think that the people that arrange for their burial, meaning they purchase a plot, etc., the idea is basically they weigh the alternatives and they make the decision as to where they'll be buried. And whatever their cheshbonos are, whatever their calculations are, it's something that was thought through, and they deliberated, and they came to a conclusion one way or the other. By leaving it to the children, it means that the decision by definition will be rushed. And it will be a last-minute decision, especially in light of the fact that the Jewish law requires very swift burial. Here in America, it's usually the case that people are buried on the day after they pass away. Usually ends up that way. When a person passes away on Monday, he's buried on Tuesday. But in Eretz Yisrael, it's much more common for people to be buried on the day that they actually pass away, which is quite swift. And therefore a lot of decisions are made in a rushed way. So by making the arrangements beforehand, at least You've given it thought, you've deliberated over it, you've made a decision one way or the other, whether it should be buried here, buried there, and so on and so forth. And your wishes will be respected if you do that. Let's focus a little bit on each of the stories. I'd like to point out a very, very interesting thing, an observation that Sfasenos makes. Now, in the first half of the parasha, when it comes to the purchase of the Maras Machpelah, the active party is Avram. Avram Avinu himself goes to negotiate with the Bnei Ches, with Ephron, and there's a very detailed account of his dealings, the bargaining, and so on and so forth. In the second half of the parasha, it's impossible for Avram to go. Avram is quite old, and Yitzchak's wife is not to be found in the vicinity. She's to be found in the far east, in Avram's birthplace. So Avram can't go himself. Instead, he sends a servant. And that difference makes perfect sense. You know, he was an older man by this time. If you make a quick calculation, he was 10 years older than Sarah. So if Sarah died at the age of 127, he was 137, which is quite old, even though he did live to be 175, which means he had many good years ahead of him. But again, a long journey would have been difficult. So it makes perfect sense that here, where the negotiations were local, he dealt with Ephron and the Bnei Ches, and there, where the dealings were long distance, he sent the Eved to do the deal. Okay, that difference we can account for easily. But there's a tremendous difference in the styles of Avram and Eliezer. Because Eliezer is a person, I guess the best way of putting it is, he wears his religion on his sleeve. Because in his dealings with the family of Sula and Lavan, and in the retelling of the story, he is praying to God, and he's bowing before God, and he's thanking God, and he's, you know, he really is a religious personality. I don't want to call him a fanatic. You know, he's a very, very good person. But it's clear where he's coming from. Because he is not concealing his belief in God, and his faith in God, and his reliance on God. And again, there is praying and expressions of gratitude and bowing to God through the story. And it's a long story. And it's repeated twice. First as it happened, and the second in the retelling. Because he tells the whole story again to Rivka's family. And again, all the details are repeated. So we have this tremendous account of this very, very religious person. We would expect that Avram should have been the same. Except, surprisingly, Avraham, the way he acts, you would not even be able to tell he was a religious person. Because he acts like any other Middle Eastern sheik would act. Because he goes, he makes requests, he thanks the people that help him. When he bows, he's not bowing to God, he's bowing to the Bnei Ches, thanking them for their assistance. And he's very courtly, he's very deliberate, not a single word of thanks to God given over the success of this enterprise. And it seems very, very strange. Well, you could say different strokes for different folks. Avram and Eliezer are two different people. But it's a very interesting thing. If you go back 2 parshiyos ago, we know that Eliezer, who Chazal say was the servant of Avram, had a nickname. He was called Danesek Eliezer. It literally means Eliezer of Damascus. But Chazal say Danesek means Shayadole Umashka. He would draw from the wells of his master's wisdom and give others to drink. That means he was the quintessence of a disciple. That means we would expect that everything that Eliezer did was really an expression of Avram's teachings. So we would expect that Eliezer should imitate every last gesture of Avram. He should be a perfect carbon copy. If he's the Dola Umashka, if he draws from those deep springs of wisdom and gives to drink, he should be exactly. And yet the contrast is something which is unbelievable. The Sfasenos makes a very, very interesting point. There's an idea in Avodas Hashem, in the service of God, that a person's service of God should be bilti lashem levado, only for God. Now there's a word in Hebrew that is applied, and it's usually misapplied, which is the word tznius. Tznius is modesty. And unfortunately, in its colloquial use, it refers to the way in which women dress. As if a woman's sleeves are long enough and her skirt is long enough and her neckline is high enough, then we say she's dressing in a manner which accommodates the consideration of tznius. But tznius in its fundamental meaning has nothing to do with dress. It has to do with living a lifestyle which does not call attention to yourself. You're not making yourself the center of things. And now I had an experience not long ago that a certain person passed away. And the person had many, many virtues, but he had one flaw, which was that he was unusually miserly. He was not a giver, so to speak. And his children were telling stories about him at the Yeshiva, where they were recounting with great fondness his stinginess. Which I thought was, okay, listen, it's true and you want to put it in this best light, but don't publicize the fact. I mean, the stories were just astounding. But they told one story about their father, which was very interesting. That the father had, Baruch Hashem, was a very successful person. He was a quite wealthy person. And he began studying Talmud. And he studied with a certain rabbi. And the rabbi once invited him to come and meet his family. And sometimes, it's interesting, people that have money sometimes forget that there are people that don't have money, which is really an interesting thing. And so he was invited to this rabbi's home, and this rabbi was a man of very, very, very modest means. That's just a nice way of putting it. He was not wealthy at all. I wouldn't even put him in the solid middle class. He was making it. Let's just put it that way. Anyway, so he drives up to this rabbi's house in his Porsche, and he goes in and he sees how modestly, and really, I guess you could say it, how poorly this family was living. And when he came home, he said to himself, he says, he feels so bad. Like, how did he drive up to that house in a Porsche, flaunting his success, flaunting his wealth? And then he said, I don't need this. And he got rid of the car, and he got a plain old jalopy, which he managed to keep for many, many, many years after that. So I told the son, when he told this story of the show, I said, that's a nice story. That story you should repeat. The truth is that that's a question of tznius. If a person, Baruch Hashem, is blessed with wealth, you can live in one of two ways. You can flaunt it, or you can be modest in your display of wealth. That's a question of tznius. Are you drawing attention to yourself? Do you want everyone to look at you? You want their eyes to pop out when you drive up? Or do you just want to kind of blend in the crowd? That's the idea of tznius. The idea of being modest is not to draw attention to yourself. You don't have to have everyone stand at attention as soon as you walk in. You can be friendly with everybody, a plain person, even if, Baruch Hashem, you're blessed with wealth or great achievements. But, you can be a regular guy. But one area where tznius is particularly important is in Avodas Hashem, in serving God. When a person is serving God, he's meant to have an audience of one. Not to be vanished level. He's not davening to the crowd. Now they tell a story that there was a great rabbi, the Alter of Slobodka. He was the founder of the Slobodka Yeshiva. A great Talmud Chacham, very, very inspiring person. And once a visitor had come to his yeshiva. And it was on a day that was Torah reading. And the visitor was given the honor of being called to the Torah. And when he went to receive his aliyah, and he said the blessing, he said it with great, great passion, great fervor, great kavanah, really slowly and trembling voice and real piety. So there was a student in the yeshiva who was really impressed. Like, this guy must be a really big tzaddik. Boy, look at the way he said that bracha. So he mentioned to the altar, to the head of the yeshiva, that he was very impressed by the way this person said the bracha. So the altar said, I'd like to see how he says the Bereshis HaTorah, the private Bereshis HaTorah, that we say individually every morning. To say it with the same passion. And when you have the Bereshis HaTorah every day, everybody says Bereshis HaTorah. Then when you quote to the Torah, you do it publicly. So the question is private Bereshis HaTorah said with the same passion as his public Bereshis HaTorah? That would impress me. But from the other hand, his private Bereshis HaTorah is lackluster. But when he has no audience, that's when he lays it on thick. Then it's less impressive. Now, the idea is that when we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the idea is built il Hashem levado. Except, there's a counter argument, as there always is. There's another way of looking at it, which is that sometimes if you are in a position to inspire others, then you have to be a little public about what you're doing. Because you have to set a good example. So if people see you doing something the right way, then they'll be inspired to be better. So that might make an argument that sometimes you should do it with a little less sneers, a little less anonymity, and a little more publicity, not because you want to be renowned or you want to be acclaimed, but because this way you'll serve as a role model to other people. Now there's a counter argument the other way. Right, which is that on the one hand, yes, it's a good thing to be a role model, but there's always a danger when you set yourself up as a role model that you are really turning yourself into the center of a personality cult. And this is a very, very dangerous thing. So there are pros and cons all the way. Well, one of the possible compromises, if you will, one of the possible ways of striking the balance will be there's a distinction between the Rebbe and the Talmud, between the teacher and the disciple. In other words, the teacher, who is the source of it all, he may opt for more anonymity, because the danger of his becoming the center of a personality cult is very, very, very great. Whereas the Hasidim, or the Talmidim, the followers, the danger is not as great. Because after all, whatever they have really is not their own. It came from the Rebbe. So they can afford to be a little more public, to be an inspiration to others, because there's no danger that they're going to attract attention to themselves, because they just redirect it to the Rebbe anyway. Now I'll tell you an amazing thing. Maybe this is the idea behind it. Every different Hasidus, every different branch of Hasidim has their own way of doing things. Lubavitcher Hasidim have their way, and Satmar Hasidim have their way, and every Hasidus has its own style. There's a Hasidus, Stoliner Hasidim. Stoliner Hasidim are renowned for their fervor in the way they daven. Now you go into Stolin, they are screaming, they are belting it out, when they daven. It's really something unusual. Except one person who davens very quietly, in a very calm, very sedate, almost a cold way. And that's the Rebbe. And it's a funny thing, because the whole Hasidus, this is the hallmark of that Hasidus, is they daven, And the
Where
Rebbe...
do they get it from?
Calm. Pardon?
Where do they get it from?
Tradition. Where they get it from. That's where they get it from. That's what they've been doing for hundreds of years. So the question is, why is the Rebbe different? So someone once told me that the way of the stolen Rebbes, like their motto, is Bilti Lashem Levado. That their service, their avod is only for the Ribono Shel Olam. They don't play to the crowd. And therefore, the stolen Rebbe doesn't daven with visible passion. He doesn't speak publicly. It's a very interesting thing. Doesn't speak publicly. A lot of things like that. Now, I had the occasion to meet him once, and he was visiting the city in which I lived, incognito. It's a long story. I can't go into the details right now. But he was traveling incognito. No one knew that he was visiting this city. And there was someone who was driving him around and tried to engage him in conversation on the lofty spiritual realm, and you couldn't do it. You could only talk to him about the most trivial things. But he would not speak about the supernatural world, the heavenly sphere, the angels. No, he talked about local things. It was fantastic. You know, when the Lubavitcher Rebbetzin passed away, and all the Rebbes came to Menachem Ovel, so they recorded all the conversations, and they published a booklet describing what the discussions had been between Lubavitcher Rebbe and all these other Rebbes. And all the other Rebbes, when they came to Lubavitcher Rebbe, they spoke lofty words of Torah and religious ideas, and etc. And the Rebbe answered, and these things were recorded. The Stolner Rebbe came. He asked, "How old was the Rebbetzin? Was she sick for a long time?" The same types of things that you would expect to hear in any Beis Ovel. That was his way. A very unusual tznius, despite the fact he was a Rebbe. Yet the Hasidim, on the other hand, what they would do was with great fervor and great passion. And yet, if you'd ask the Chassid, where do you get it from? Where do you get your inspiration? Where do you get your passion from? No doubt about it. He'll take it from the Rebbe. What do you mean from the Rebbe? The Rebbe doesn't do any of that. You don't understand. Right? You don't understand. Because you're looking at the Rebbe, you don't see it. But you should know, when the Rebbe moves his hand this way, it means something very, very lofty. When he moves his head this way, it means something very, very lofty. Because you just can't pick it up. You're not sensitive. You don't have the antenna to pick it up. It says, but we who have been following so long, says we understand that when he's doing this, and that's what it means, and that's the significance, and it's up there in the lofty spheres, and we are just depicting it in a more graphic way. But in reality, it's nothing more than what the Rebbe himself is doing in a very, very secretive way.
Doesn't the Rebbe stand out?
He stands out in his plainness.
Yeah.
In his plainness. Now, that's saying Avram and Eliezer. Eliezer is bowing and praying and thanking, and he's doing all these things. If you ask Eliezer, where do you get this from? Where did you learn this from? He says, I learned it from the Rebbe. I learned it from Avram. When do you learn it from Avram? Right? Avram doesn't do that. We have a whole episode. He goes and he negotiates. He deals with them. He's gracious. He's, as we said, like a Middle Eastern sheik. That's because you don't see it. You don't understand it. When Avram moves his hand, he's thinking about that. When he moves his head, he's thinking about that. Every little motion alludes to something which is lofty, something spiritual, something which is in the clouds. So you don't pick it up. But Eliezer was the Dail Nashka. He was able to draw the water from those very, very deep springs and give others to drink. Says, why was Eliezer able to do that, not Avram? So Avram had to bend over backwards. Avram didn't want that everyone should come to worship him. He wanted that he should be a conduit to bring everyone closer to God. So he had to avoid becoming the center of a personality cult. It isn't about me. It's about the Ribono Shel Olam. And therefore Avraham Avinu was sonua. He was modest to the point of being nondescript. Right? Eliezer, who was the Talmud, he could be public. Why? Because there was no danger in his becoming the center of things, because he was nothing more than the representation of what Avram stood for. And therefore he had the luxury of being able to be public. Yes?
But isn't it also that their tasks are so different? Like once Abraham got the caver, he had nothing further to do with those people, and he had no relationship with them. Whereas Eliezer, once the marriage was contracted, they would be involved with this family forever.
Not at all. Not at all. Once Eliezer left with Rivka, right, they were cut off. It only happens to be that later Yaakov Avinu went back to the family. But there was no expectation of that happening. We're not talking about, calling them chutanim, once a week, say hello. It didn't exist in those days, right? When they brought Rivka back to Eretz Yisrael, that was it. She essentially was separate from her family, never to see them again. So, but the point is, in the meantime, as you're dealing with them, now this is something which is a little bit relevant to us. It's an interesting question. Someone does you a favor. So what is your response? What is your reaction to the favor? Do you say, like, Baruch Hashem? Or do you say, thank you very much? That really is the difference. Avram thanks the Bnei Ches. He thanks Ephraim. Thank you for being so gracious. I mean, even though they really weren't so gracious. They really extracted a very high price from Maras Machpelah. But Avram deals with them as human beings. Eliezer, when a kindness is extended to him, thanks to Ribono Shel Olam. The truth is that both are true. You have to thank the person that helped you. You have to thank the Ribono Shel Olam. But the question is emphasis and accent. And this way, Eliezer was very different than Avram.
It depends on his audience, though, because in Melchizedek, when he's talking Melchizedek, he clearly thanks the Ribono Shel Olam.
Melchizedek does.
No, Abraham does. Melchizedek thanks Abraham first, and then...
Look in the Chumash. The Chumash doesn't mention anything that Abraham said.
That's what
It mentions what Melchizedek said.
Yeah,
But doesn't Abraham respond?
No. If you go back, it says, Perak Yud Daled, Pasuk, right? Pasuk Yud Tes, right? Just Melchizedek. Avram responds to the Melech Stone, right? But when he responds to the Melech Stone is not to give thanks to Ribono Shel Olam, it's to swear by the Ribono Shel Olam he's not going to take anything from him. There is no overt praise of God for his victory. It's noteworthy. Anyway, that's an interesting thought about Avram and Eliezer. Getting back to the second story, the story of looking for a wife. I'll tell you something very, very, very personal. 1 year ago, Motzoi Shabbos Parshas Chaya was the celebration of my daughter's engagement. And so I said a Ramban, and the Ramban is worth repeating. And it was great that I had this opportunity to say the Ramban on that occasion. It was like there would have been no better Motzoi Shabbos for that celebration than that. The Ramban says an amazing thing. The pasuk says that Avram was old. Hashem beirach es Avram b'koil. Hashem blessed Avram with everything. Everything. So what does it mean, everything? So the Gemara brings an opinion, Chaya like Bas, that he had a daughter as well. As we know that he had sons, Ishmael and Yitzchak. Did he have daughters? So Hashem beirach es Avram b'koil, that he also had a daughter.
Oh.
Very nice. There's another opinion in the Gemara that says Hashem beirach Avram b'koil shelo hayalo bas. They didn't have a daughter. That was the blessing. They didn't have a daughter. So this is a big problem. Right? Anybody that stumbles across this Gemara wonders, like, oh boy, what kind of a thing like that? Now, I remember once I davened in a shul. And the president of the shul was wishing Mazel Tov to a congregant whose wife had a baby girl. And he decided to tell a joke. And it really didn't go over well. He said the joke, he said that why are 5 daughters better than $5 million? Because if you have $5 million, you want more. That's what he said. I mean, it was just, talk about something that didn't go over. I mean, it was just terrible. So what is the idea of this Maimer Chazal? He didn't have a daughter. So the Ramban says an amazing pshat. The Ramban says an amazing pshat. Listen to what the Ramban says. It says, in those days, what was the way? If a man came from one place and his wife came from another place, right, where did the couple live? So it seems that the practice was that the wife moved to where the husband's family was from. Like you see over here, right, that Rivka comes with Eliezer to Eretz Yisrael to marry Yitzchak, and they live in Eretz Yisrael. For a short period of time, 20 years, as Yaakov lived by his in-laws, but ultimately it was understood that he was going to come back to Eretz Yisrael and live with his family. So that was the style, that when a wife came from one place, a husband came from another place, this is the way it was going to be. If Avram would have had a daughter, so who would that daughter marry? Now we know that Avram was not in favor of marriage with the locals. Right? We know he made Eliezer swear that he's not going to take a wife for Yitzchak from the local people of Canaan. They were accursed people. So undoubtedly, in the same way that he sent Eliezer back there to find a wife for Yitzchak, if he would have had a daughter, he would have looked for a husband back there. But where would that daughter ultimately have lived? Not by Avram, back in Aram Naharayim, with Besuel, with Lavan, with the rest of the family. And she would have been under the influence. She'd be living among idolaters. And who knows what would have happened to her in that situation, being torn away from hearth and home. So says the Ramban that under those circumstances, it would have been a blessing not to have a daughter. That if you're going to raise a daughter, and then that daughter will marry somebody who will turn her into an idolater, take her away, then having such a daughter isn't a blessing. Meaning with all the virtues she had, and she was a daughter, after all, of Avraham Avinu, probably she would have had many, many virtues. But you can't call it a blessing until you know that her marriage partner and the place they're going to live is appropriate, that they can have a proper Jewish life, if you will. So I said this at the celebration of my daughter's engagement. I said that with all her wonderful virtues, and they are many, but you can't say that it's a blessing to have such a child until you know who she's going to marry, and that everything is al-tzad hayoseh tov, everything is appropriate and properly set up. Then you can say that it's a blessing to have had such a daughter. So that was what I said at the engagement, that with all her virtues, it's true, it's a bracha to have a daughter like that, a wonderful girl. But until you know how the parsha of her marriage will unfold, you can't yet say it's a blessing. Because when that happens, Baruch Hashem, our son-in-law is a very special boy, so then you can say it's really a blessing. So that's a very interesting Ramban. I'll tell you another interesting thing, a little tidbit in this story. You know, there's an interesting thing in Jewish life. You find often that people that come from a certain segment of the Jewish community tend to quote Sfarim that were written in their part of the world and by people of their group. So Hasidim tend to quote Hasidish Sfarim. Non-Hasidim quote non-Hasidic Sfarim. Now, it just seems to be that way all the time. Reb Chaim Brisker was a Lithuanian misnagid, a non-chassid. So you would not expect him to quote Hasidish Svarim. But there was one little vertel he used to quote from the Sefer Bereshis Chaim often. And the Bereshis Chaim is a real Hasidish Sefer. Someday I'll tell you about the Bereshis Chaim. And Reb Chaim used to quote this thought from him on Parshas Chaya very approvingly, all the time. It says like this, it says that you have Eliezer, this servant. So 2 weeks ago we read about him, and he's called Avdo Zakan Beso. He's the elder of his household, the major domo. Hamo shel b'chol asher lo. He controlled everything of Avram. Everything of all his assets, his wealth, the livestock, the cattle, the land, the money, everything. Eliezer was in charge. Wow. Avram had perfect trust and faith in Eliezer. In this week's parsha, he's sending Eliezer on a mission, find a wife for Yitzchak. And all of a sudden, you have to promise me, you have to swear. You're not going to, no, swear to me. He said, promise me. What if this? And I'll let you off there. All of a sudden, a distrust. No, he has to swear, he has to promise. Avram is worried that he's going to violate the instructions. This is what's going on. See, so the Bereshis Chaim says like this. He says, let's say a stranger comes to town. And he's visiting town. He doesn't know anybody. So Baruch Hashem, Jews are hospitable. So someone invites him to stay with him. But he's wondering, can I trust the kashrus? Maybe the standards aren't what they should be. So what's he going to do? So he'll go to the rabbi and tell the rabbi, says, I was invited to stay with such and such. Can I eat there? And the rabbi says, yeah, you can eat there. That's fine, good. If you say so, good enough. You ask one question, you make one inquiry. If it passes muster, fine, no problem. Let's say you come to this town and you're looking for a business partner, right? You have a substantial sum of money that you want to invest, and a person presents himself as a potential partner. And is he honest? Is he a hard worker? So is it enough to go to the Rav and say, tell me, this person, is he honest? Oh, yeah, he's honest, no problem. No, you'll go to his bank, you'll go to his customers, you'll go to his suppliers, you'll go to everybody who has even a fleeting relationship with him, because it's money. You gotta make sure, right? But what do you mean, keeping kosher isn't as important as money? Sadly, it's not. In other words, for us, money is very, very important. Keeping kosher, the rabbi says, oh, it's good enough. I trust that. I'm not going to ask 30 people what he eats and what he does and what he knows. The rabbi's recommendation is enough. When it comes to money, no, I'm going to ask everybody. Everybody has to know every last detail. So Avram had the exact opposite attitude, says the Bereshis Chaim. When it came to money, Eliezer, good enough, trust him, no problem. You don't have to make a million inquiries. I can rely on him. If he says so, it's fine. But a question of religion, who's going to marry Yitzchak? So it's that you have to ask 1,000 questions. You have to have him swear oaths. You have to express his worries, because that was truly important to him. So it's a very interesting thing. Reb Chaim Brisker used to quote this with great approval, that you see that Avram, what was important to him. If Eliezer runs off with his money, big deal. But Yitzchak's marriage is something which has to be protected at all costs. Yes?
But perhaps by virtue of the fact of where Eliezer was going, Abraham knew, perhaps the trickery, etc., he needed a way of preparing Eliezer psychologically to be ready. The taking an oath, etc., would put him through that process, perhaps, and enable him to be in a better position.
But that's the question. There weren't equal temptations in his business dealings? Probably when he sent Eliezer to do business deals, there probably also were opportunities for illicit gain. Like skimming some off the top for himself. But Rome trusted him. We don't find that he demanded anything of them.
But when it came to a burial place, he didn't send it.
No, I think that proves our point even further. that he trusted Eliezer with all his money, but when it came to the Maras and Machpelah, that was something he had to do himself. Right? He had to make sure.
So it wasn't so much a
he would have gone himself if he could have, undoubtedly. If he could have gone himself, he would have, to arrange a wife for Yitzchak too. It was just physically impossible.
One of the first things that happens when Eliezer meets Rivka is that he gives her things of value, gold. That's not kesef? Is that what? That is not signifying the contract? That's just a gift?
Again, there is a question in the Mefarshim on that, whether that really was, those were just gifts, like, engagement gifts, or what this actually was the Kesef Kedushin. That's a question in Sfarim about this. Okay, the hour's late, and there's so much on this parasha, but I'll share with you one last thing. A little peripheral, but it's a very interesting thing. There's a medrash which comments on the fact that Eliezer is the one that made the most important decision in life for Yitzchak. That's a very interesting thing. Who to marry is a very, very important decision. And Yitzchak did not make this decision for himself. It was made for him by Eliezer. So the Medrash brings a pasuk in Mishlei which says that Eved Maskil Yimshoyel B'ven Nevish, that a understanding servant will dominate an embarrassing son. An understanding servant will dominate an embarrassing son. So the understanding servant is Eliezer. The embarrassing son is Yitzchak. Why was he an embarrassing son? He's an embarrassing son because he embarrassed the entire world. Because what he did was something that was far beyond anything that anybody else had ever done. So therefore he was an embarrassing son. Not that he was an embarrassment, right? He embarrassed everybody else. He was called an embarrassing son. And Eliezer is the Eved Maskil. He is the understanding servant. So the Medrash says, what was his great understanding? Well, where do you see this tremendous understanding? So the Medrash says an amazing, amazing, amazing thing. It says like this. We know, where did Eliezer come from? Eliezer was a descendant of Canaan, who was the son of Cham. And there was a curse that was given way back. Noach cursed Cham and Canaan that they should be servants, enslaved to the sons of Shem. And Eliezer's being a servant to Avram was the fulfillment of that curse. So the Medrash says that Eliezer's understanding was this. He said to himself, I understand that I have to be a slave. That I understand. I understand this is the curse that was given to Canaan, to Cham, their descendants. I have to be a slave. Now the question is, who should I be a slave to? Should I be a slave to a barbari, which is a barbarian, right? Or should I be a slave to Avram? So he chose to be a slave to Avram. So that was the great understanding, great haskalah. So Sfasemis asks the question, I don't understand. If you have a choice of two employers, right? One is a barbarian. He's cruel, he's dishonest, he'll double-cross you at every juncture. And the other person is refined and kind and generous. No, it's not rocket science, of course. You'll work for the better boss, right? What is this tremendous haskell, tremendous insight, Eved Maskil, an understanding servant, because he opted to work for Avram, he could have worked for a barbarian instead. Now, what does it mean? So the Sfasema says that the haskala is not that. That's a no-brainer. The haskala is the first thing that he said. I know I have to be a servant. In other words, very often in life, things seem to be going a certain way, and we fight it. We fight it. We don't accept what seems to be necessarily so. We protest. And often that's a mistake. That's a mistake. I heard recently, a great rabbi said that one of the reasons that our lives are often so miserable is because we are fighting against that which must be. That God is guiding our life in a certain direction, and we're fighting, we're resisting. We're not willing to accept that this is what God has in mind for us. This is His plan. So we always want it to be different, right? And we actively work trying to undermine God's scheme. And of course, if God really wants it to be a certain way, there's nothing you can do. That's the way it's going to be. Right? Ravos machshavos belevish. There are many thoughts in the heart of a man. Vatzas Hashem hisakum. But ultimately, it's the counsel of God that will stand. So this was a tremendous insight. He said, listen, I know that I'm meant to be a slave. This is the curse that was given to Chum, given to Canaan. I'm meant to be a slave. Now the only question is making the most of the situation. Right? So of course, if I'm going to be a slave anyway, it makes sense to be a slave to Abraham and not to a barbarian. But the idea, the willingness to accept things the way they're meant to be, that's a tremendous, tremendous understanding. And the Gemara says in Maseches Gittin a very, very interesting thing, that slaves, there was a tendency in the ancient times that slaves tended to be promiscuous. Avdo behefkeva nichale. An Eved, he wants to be loose, he wants to be unrestrained. So the question is, why is that? I mean, it's a sociological fact, but why should that be? The answer is like this. If you have a person who is a slave, and he's restrained in so many ways, right? No one wants to be a slave. So he's looking for some way in which he can be free. Well, if he can't be free in terms of his work schedule, he'll be free in terms of his sexual practices. So this is his way of expressing freedom, through promiscuity. He thinks that if he's with a different maidservant every night, that's a demonstration of freedom. Now, but really, it's depravity. But what motivates him is the fact that he's unwilling to accept the fact that he's a slave. If he's willing to accept the fact that he's a slave, I'm a slave. Now I make the most of it. He'd live a different life. There'd be much more contentment, much more satisfaction. He wouldn't be fighting, he wouldn't be resistant, he wouldn't be trying to find some way in which I won't be a slave. That was the tremendous haskalah of Eliezer. And it's a very interesting thing. Now, what was this idea? Why did Noach make such a decree? So it's an interesting thing. You know, the Medrash says that when Noach got drunk, you know the story, he got drunk, so his son Chum and his grandson Canaan did something to him. When he sobered up, he realized what they had done. So what had they done? It's not clear from the text. The Gemara says that they castrated Noach when he was drunk. Why did they do that? So the Medrash is a fascinating thing. Noach had 3 sons, and they were scared that Noach was going to try to have a 4th son, which would have meant that the world would have been divided 4 ways instead of 3 ways. Now the world was a big place. Even they knew it was a big place. So, you know, you're going to do a thing like that because you want a 1/3 instead of a 1/4, so it's worthwhile to do that to your father. I mean, that was a selfishness, a self-centeredness, which is unimaginable. So Noach said like this. Noach said that this requires a tikkun. You have to rectify this. The only way to rectify that type of self-centeredness is through serving others. When we serve others, when we devote our lives to the service of others, we become that much less selfish, that much less self-centered. And that was the tikkun, that was the rectification. And that's what Eliezer said, it has to be that way. Not that it has to be that way because, okay, there's a curse and I'm stuck. It has to be that way because he understood this is the best thing. Now, part of being a slave was a curse. That's what Noah said, over Canaan. Cursed is Canaan. But it's very interesting, in this parsha, when Lavan greeted Eliezer, he says, come, Baruch Hashem, come, blessed person. That's an amazing thing, that somehow Lavan understood that Eliezer is now blessed, that Eliezer achieved the tikkun, he rectified himself. How so? through his service of Avram. Through his devoted service to Avram, he was able to uproot that self-centeredness, that selfishness, which was part of his legacy, and he became a selfless person. So no longer was he cursed, now he is blessed. And the Maral points out an interesting thing, that the difference between Orur and Baruch is that the Gemara says Aleph stands for Orur, Bey stands for Baruch. So it's a very interesting coincidence. Why is that? So Aleph is 1. Only its number is 1. That's what it means to be a cursed person, a person who can't give, because there's nobody else in his book. All there is myself. That's what it means to be cursed. Beis is bracha. Beis is 2. Once I see there are 2 people as a person I share with, right, I'm no longer cursed. I'm blessed, because now I bestow blessing on other people. And that's really the idea, that Chum and Canaan were cursed. Why were they cursed? Because they had a selfishness, that they wanted everything for themselves, or as much as they could have for themselves. So that had to be rectified. How is that rectified? When you give to others, you become temperamentally the type of person who wants to give to others. Right? Your actions influence your character. And therefore, through this process, Eliezer achieved his tikkun, his rectification. He no longer was Orur, now he was